Psychological traps that lead to unethical behavior. This presentation is based on the work of Hoyt and Hershey, the ethical executive. Have you ever noticed that those who proclaim that they would never do anything unethical are those who are caught committing unethical acts? The best way to prevent committing unethical acts when you are an ethical person is to understand your own psychological traps. We all have them. And whether we attribute our behavior to nature or nurture, our self-awareness helps us avoid situations that could lead us to act unethically. Which ones might present problems for you? Defensive traps, annihilation of guilt. Anger. Hostility and excessive anger seem to squelch empathy and guilt. People high in empathy are low in hostility, and people who are hostile are low in empathy. Unless blatant abuse is going on, anger is most often a cover-up emotion, that is, a secondary emotion that hides more vulnerable feelings, which are anxiety, shame, helplessness. People who have experienced trauma often shut down painful feelings. It becomes automatic that they're not even aware that they do it. They make it happen by tensing the muscles in their upper bodies and shifting their mental attention quickly to something else. Alcohol is an efficient way of extinguishing our feelings of guilt. The number one cause of relapse in alcoholics is negative emotions. One of the main reasons people become addicted to alcohol is to manage their bad feelings. Desensitization. Commit a transgression once, it engenders guilt. Commit the transgression again and again, your guilt is deadened. Defensive traps, minimizing. Reduction words. Using words like small, sort of, barely, no big deal, only a little, to minimize unethical behavior. Renaming is the use of benign or benevolent words to replace words that have a negative connotation. Renaming camouflages unethical transgressions. Sometimes renaming can even give a transgression a wholesome connotation. Advantageous comparison allows the individual who has committed an unethical transgression to lessen guilt by comparing what has been done to something worse. Zooming out is like the function of a computer program that zooms out from a small specific area of a map so that the view progressively encompasses more and more areas. Then the person contrasts the big picture with the street intersection and realizes how trivial the small area is in comparison to the larger area. Everybody does it. When we do something that is unethical, we appease our guilt by falsely assuming that it's something everybody does. We won't get caught. When the chance of being punished is low, the sting of unethical behavior seems less serious, and we tend to minimize the importance of the transgression. Think about Watergate in the 1970s. If the President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, could not get away with trying to cover up the unethical act of the break-in at Watergate, how likely would it be for ordinary citizens to not be caught committing an unethical act? We didn't hurt them that bad. This particular type of minimization is minimizing the harm done by one's unethical behavior. Self-serving bias is what causes us to say, yes, what happened is wrong, but it wasn't my fault. It's our tendency to take credit for success and to attribute failure to external causes. Blaming circumstances can be another manifestation of self-serving biases. One more way we try to minimize transgression in an effort to reduce our guilt and shame. Other defensive traps. Addiction. The activity of drug use often solves a problem in the short term, even if it makes the problem worse in the long term. Coworker reactions. If our fellow coworkers ignore, justify, or condone our unethical behavior, it supports our view that we didn't do anything wrong, or that if we did, it's not a big deal. Established impressions. Our established impressions of others, and it doesn't take a lot to establish these impressions, tend to endure even if we are convinced later that our impressions are wrong. Contempt for the victim. When we dehumanize others, we lose our empathy toward them and see them as objects without hopes or feelings. When we lose our empathy for others, it is easier to harm them without guilt. The more we dehumanize others, the easier it is to harm them. And the more we harm them, the more we dehumanize them. Doing is believing. Often, what we do is what we become. Frequently, we observe our own behavior, that is, what we say or do, and in so doing, we influence our attitudes, that is, our negative or positive feelings about our actions. Doing is believing doesn't happen if we are ordered to do something. It only works when we feel like we have freely chosen to act. If we choose to act unethically, the act itself will shape our beliefs and attitudes about our transgressions. It's possible, to some degree, that we will begin to see the transgressions as more acceptable. Personality traps. The garden variety psychopath is diagnosed by psychologists and psychiatrists as having an antisocial personality disorder. One cannot make any claim that neglect or poverty in childhood causes corruption in adulthood, but Hoyt and Hershey suggest that further research might establish that relationship. Low self-esteem is defined as our overall self-evaluation. People who tend to feel worthless are tempted to cheat or lie to boost the impressions they make on others in an attempt to feel better about themselves. As children, authoritarian leaders were taught to be respectful and dutiful, and if they disobeyed, they would often receive severe punishment. The authoritarian leader then fortifies the trap of conformity by squashing any dissent within the group. Personality traps. Social dominance orientation, or SDO, is a trait that delineates one's preference for inequality among social groups. It is the wish that the groups and organizations you belong to be superior and dominate. Authoritarians desire individual dominance. SDO is the desire that some categories of people dominate others. People who are high in SDO have poor empathy. They tend to be intolerant of others and are low in altruism. Because altruism and empathy are often the royal roads to ethical behavior, people high in SDO are more apt to be unethical. The need for closure is the desire for a definite answer on any topic. Any answer as opposed to confusion and ambiguity. It's the tendency to jump on the first opinion that comes to mind instead of tolerating a state of not knowing and taking the time to look at a problem or judgment from different angles. Although need for closure is influenced by situational factors, it is also a personality trait. In general, empathy actually enhances our capacity for moral behavior. But sometimes we can get into trouble when our emphatic response overpowers our sense of fairness.